Welcome back to the Wasteland, everybody. Welcome back to Fallout New Vegas, where today we're going to be taking a look at the Bumper Sword and its two unique variants, where they are two of the strongest melee weapons in the entire game, and the regular Bumper Sword is not really lacking either. So let's talk about each of these. These weapons are probably going to be found towards the mid-game, or potentially even to the early game if you want to run right to the Repcon facility, because I believe that's the first area where you can really pick up a Bumper Sword, at least the regular Bumper Sword. You could technically go to Lonesome Road and get one even earlier than that, and that would make your melee build exceptionally strong throughout pretty much all of the game. You could just use that and nothing else. But the Bumper Sword is a fairly rare weapon that generally super mutants have. There's not really a whole lot of other enemies that carry around Bumper Swords. Generally, it's just the super mutants and the Nightkin. So the regular Bumper Sword requires 50 melee in order to use, 8 strength to wield, so it is a very hefty weapon as you would kind of expect. I mean, this is a sword made out of part of a car, and it is wielded by super mutants, so kind of makes sense that it would have a high strength requirement to it. Not too bad on the melee requirement though. This one does 32 damage on hit, which is fairly decent, 46 damage per second. The Bumper Swords don't swing super fast as you would kind of expect from two-handed weapons. It's about the same as like the Sledgehammer or the Super Sledge in terms of attack speed. This has 32 crit damage, so same as its regular damage, which is perfectly fine. A 1x crit modifier, so normal crits. This one does cost 38 action points to use in VATS, which is fairly high. The good news about this, though, is that all of the Bumper Swords have a really good melee attack when they're in VATS, where their unique attack once you have 50 melee is Mauler, and Mauler can knock down enemies instantly, which is really good. That is extremely strong, even more so if you combine it with other melee-related perks like Slayer and Super Slam, which can also give you knockdown. So this is pretty much guaranteed knockdowns in VATS, which is really good. This one does weigh 12, so it is a very heavy weapon as you would kind of expect, at least heavy for a melee weapon. Technically you don't need to carry around more than one of these, so 12 weight isn't too bad, since you don't have to account for ammo. And the Bumper Sword has 300 item HP. The Bumper Sword does not break very fast at all, which is fantastic. For the general pros of the Bumper Sword, this one does have pretty good damage. It also has a very good VATS attack, and this one does just look cool in my opinion. I really like the aesthetic of it. This weapon fits really well. Is it the coolest looking sword? Not really, but it does fit the setting really well. I love, like, when we do have post-apocalyptic games like this, or something like Dying Light 2 that did this pretty well, in my opinion, was taking, like, junk items and turning them into weapons. I think the Bumper Sword kind of fits this really well, and it also fits really well thematically for a super mutant to have this, where they could have seen people like Caesar's Legion using blades, and decided that they're just going to rip off a giant hunk of steel and then grind it to where they can use it as a sword too, which makes sense. That would be something that, like, the, I guess, less intelligent super mutants might do. Lily, the companion, also has a Bumper Sword as well. Hers is a little bit different because hers is made from a vertibird blade. So it's made from a helicopter blade, which is kind of cool. You can't actually get that one unless you want to spawn it in with commands, so that one is just unique to Lily. For the cons of the Bumper Sword, this one is fairly heavy. They all weigh 12, so it's fairly heavy for a melee weapon, although that is heavy enough for heavyweight to cut it in half, so down to 6 isn't that big of a deal. And since the Bumper Swords are fairly rare, you're probably not going to be finding a whole lot of them, which also makes it so repairing them can be a little bit of a pain. Not such a big deal once you get jury rigging though, or if you just want to use weapon repair kits. These also have slow attacks, but that's not too bad. They're not one of the slowest attacking weapons in the game, and they do high damage per hit, as well as, since they're a two-handed weapon, they do have fairly long reach, and since they're a two-handed weapon, if you do have a perk like Super Slam, you can knock down enemies easier with them. So the cons aren't too bad for this. Let's also go over some perks that can help out the Bumper Sword and its unique variants. So the first perk would be Heavyweight. This can cut its weight down in half since these all weigh over 10. They weigh 12, which would take it down to 6, making them a lot more lightweight, which is great. Slayer is fantastic since this gives you more attack speed, and it's really good on any melee build. Super Slam to knock down enemies, very good for two-handed melee. Purifier to kill things like Deathclaws and Super Mutants, also really good for weapons like this. And then Piercing Strike, which give you armor piercing. All of them are fantastic for a melee and unarmed build, and I'd recommend you take them all if you're running one of those builds. For an overall rating for the Bumper Sword, I think I'm going to put this one in the B tier. I think it's fine enough for the most part. It's a pretty decent melee weapon, and if you're running a melee weapons build, if you get it early on enough, if you want to go to the Repcon facility and pick one of these up, it will serve you fairly well. You could also, you know, be using like the rebar clubs that you find around there, which are decent enough too during the mid game. These will fall off later, but the unique versions of this don't really fall off. They're pretty strong. So let's talk about the Blade of the East up next, which this one is a unique weapon that is wielded by the Legate. Now, the Blade of the East can only be obtained by killing the Legate and taking this, unless you want to spawn it in with commands. But if you do kill the legate, then that means you're already at the very end of the game, and you're not really going to be able to use the Blade of the East against basically anything, sadly. Unless, of course, you have mods that make it so you can either get this early on, other enemies can have this, or you can extend the ending to where you can keep playing the game. So the regular Blade of the East of the game has very limited use because it is at the very end of the game where there's just nothing else for you to kill besides a couple NCR troopers, and that's about it. And I guess some Legion members that might be straggling after you killed the legate. So this one requires 100 melee and 9 strength in order to wield, one of the highest requirements out of any weapon in the game. This one does 65 damage on hit, plus it also has a burning effect or a damage over time effect. That is 2 damage for 10 seconds, which can be pretty good. And this is similar to like the shish kebab, although the Blade of the East isn't affected by like pyromaniac, since this isn't technically a fire weapon. This one does 98 damage per second, which is fairly good for a melee weapon, and then it does the additional damage over time, so you might be getting a little bit more out of that. This one has 30 crit damage, fairly low crit damage for some reason, less than the bumper sword. The bumper sword actually has the highest amount of crit damage out of these for some odd reason. This has a 1-time crit modifier, costs 35 action points. This one weighs 12, and the Blade of the East has 800 item health. So it takes a very long time to break this weapon. Like I said, there is some obvious cons to this though, and that is that it's at the very end of the game. You're not going to get it until the very end of the game. So using it is not really going to be all that viable for the most part. This one I would say is quite a bit better than the regular bumper sword, and I would move this one up into S tier. It's a really cool item, even though it basically is unusable. So you could also say that this one's F tier because it is at the very end of the game naturally, and if you're playing on like console and you don't have a way to mod this into the game, then you're just not really going to get to use it at all. So could go to either extreme. It's a very strong weapon if you do get to use it, but it's a fairly weak weapon in the grand scheme of Fallout New Vegas because of its very limited use. Let's move on to the Blade of the West now. The Blade of the West is not really a unique weapon. It's unique to the Divide, but you can get this on multiple marked men. So the Blade of the West is very similar to the Blade of the East. This one requires 100 melee and 9 strength to wield, same as the Blade of the East. This one does 60 damage on hit, so quite high damage, 128 damage per second. This one swings the fastest out of any of the bumper swords, which is really cool. This one does 30 crit damage, which is also kind of low, half of its normal damage, but that is kind of common for some melee weapons. This one has a 1.5 times crit modifier, so you're more likely to hit crits with this, which is pretty good. This one costs the least amount of action points at 29, making it for a decent two-handed melee weapon. Most two-handed melee weapons generally fall around the 30-point range for action points, so this one is fairly normal. This one also weighs 12. This one does have a lot less item health than the other bumper swords, though, at 150. That's still pretty high for most melee weapons, and once you have jury rigging, this one's going to be super easy to take care of. So it has enough item health to where it's not going to be breaking super quick. This one also has a unique ability added on where it has knockdown on crit. So you have another way to knock down enemies, and if you have Super Slam, you have a way to knock down enemies, and you also have Mauler in this, so you have another way to knock down enemies. If an enemy is knocked down, that means it can't be attacking you, which makes it so that you can fight just about anything one-on-one with a melee build just in general. But the Blade of the West is particularly good at doing this, and the Blade of the West I think is one of the best melee weapons in the game. I'm going to put this one all the way up into S tier. It's also one of the coolest looking weapons in my opinion, and again, if you do want to run to the Lonesome Road right away, kill one of the marked men, or pick this up off of a body, you absolutely can do that, and then you'll have an incredibly strong melee weapon for the rest of your run. So that'll do it for the bumper swords. They are a very cool weapon, very unique. I wish there was more weapons like this in some of the other Fallout games. We don't really get a whole lot of super mutant melee weapons. Most of the time it's like wooden boards or like sledgehammers, sometimes super sledges, and that's about it, which I think those are fitting too. But I would like to see more bladed weapons that the super mutants wield, because could you imagine like a super mutant knife and it just being like a full-size sword for you? That'd be really cool to see too. So tell me your thoughts on the bumper sword and its unique variants down in the comments below. I'd love to hear that. Thank you guys so very much for watching this. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye, everybody!